As we approach the end of this NFL season, I think that there are around 5, maybe 6 coaches that are on the hot seat right now. I'm going to go through them from least likely to get fired to most likely to get fired. So let's hop right into this list. At number 5, I think there's really realistically 5. Let's hop in at number 5, Zac Taylor, Cincinnati Bengals. I do not think that the Bengals will fire Zac Taylor if they make the playoffs, but that if is looking questionable at this point. I think the Bengals have a 7 to 8% chance to make the playoffs right now. It is really dependent on how the Broncos perform as well as how they perform. The Bengals need to win out. The Dolphins need to lose one. The Colts need to lose one. The Broncos need to lose out, I believe. But with that being said, I think that Zac Taylor has had a very disappointing season coaching-wise. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, both having career-type seasons, damn near NFL record-breaking type seasons, definitely franchise record-breaking type seasons, and they're probably going to miss the playoffs. In my opinion, the buck stops at the head coach. And when you're the Cincinnati Bengals owner and you're thinking about how much money you're paying Jamar Chase or going to be paying Jamar Chase, how much money you're already paying Joe Burrow, and you have other guys like T. Higgins on the contract line ready to get signed, your head coach has got to perform. And by all means, the defensive coaching staff has not put together a job-worthy performance, in my opinion. Now, I don't like to call for people's jobs and say, oh, so-and-so deserves to get fired. They're terrible. I'm a guy behind a mic. I'm not a professional coach. I do not understand X's and O's like a lot of experts do. Now, do I know some? Yes. Do I know everything? Absolutely not. I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, if the Bengals just ran a 3-4 instead of a 4-3, they would be in this, and this scenario. I'm not going to do that. I will say, though, the numbers don't lie, and the Bengals defense has been one of the most historically underperforming defenses based off of previous success. They brought back the majority of their roster from the previous season, so I think that there are a lot of excuses that you could provide for this Bengals team, but the defensive side of the football does not have them. I think that that is going to be the crux of the argument behind whether or not Zac Taylor keeps his job. Now, is he an offensive, defensive-minded coach? I think he's more offensive, obviously. I don't know if all of the blame goes onto him, but when you have these defensive mishaps, it goes onto the head coach whether or not these things get taken care of. So I have him as the least likely head coach to get fired just because the Bengals, like with Marvin Lewis, I believe, the head coach there for, 16 years, I think, not a single AFC championship appearance. They are very hesitant to shake things up, but I do think that money talks, and the money that they're spending on Joe Burrow and will be spending on Jamar Chase could make them make a move. So that's why I've got Zac Taylor here at number 5. Number 4, Mike McCarthy, Dallas Cowboys. A lot of people don't think Mike McCarthy will get fired. I think it is more likely than anything else happening in the Cowboys offseason. And why do I think that? Jerry Jones in this last year's offseason kept talking about how the Cowboys are going to be all in, all in, all in. But they re-signed Dak Prescott. They re-signed CeeDee Lamb. They're going to re-sign Micah Parsons. Who else in this pecking order is really up for a contract? It's Mike McCarthy. I don't think that he re-ups. I think that the Cowboys decide to part ways here, regardless of whether or not the Cowboys continue to win games. Dak Prescott being out played a big factor in this, I think. I think the Cowboys probably make the playoffs with Dak Prescott. With that being said, though, they missed the playoffs after yet another disappointing playoff performance last year. I don't think Mike McCarthy gets another contract, so that's why I have him as the 4th most likely coach to get fired. I do think there is a world where Jerry Jones just continues with the status quo as he did this season, so that's why I don't have him as the most likely head coach. But moving on to number 3, Brian Daboll, New York Giants. Now, a report just came out today as I'm recording this video that the Giants are hesitant. The Mara family is hesitant on blowing up the franchise and starting over. However, you cannot tell me that this entire team is predicated on what this coaching staff has done and has not done. Now, one thing I want to talk about is a lot of drama last year with the Giants coaching staff. Another disappointing season for the Giants after a playoff victory 2 years ago. And then re-signing Daniel Jones to this massive contract. That was the main issue with the Giants. And I don't necessarily know how much Brian Daboll had to do with that. However, when you restart your franchise and grab a new quarterback and you set up a new offense, you really want to put a coach that has some kind of stability up in front of you. Do the Giants really want to draft a quarterback with their coach going into the season on the hot seat? We've seen that time and time again. We saw that with the Cleveland Browns when they drafted Baker Mayfield. We are now seeing it with the Chicago Bears, drafting Caleb Williams and then firing Matt Eberflus halfway into the year. That kind of stuff is what messes up young quarterbacks. I do not think the Giants want to do that yet again after having quarterbacks like Daniel Jones lose his first head coach and maybe his second head coach after getting cut. All that being said, I don't think that the Giants are going to fire Brian Daboll, but if the season gets uglier and uglier as we go on, kind of like this Falcons loss, 7-34, we might see the Giants shake it up. That's why I have him as the third most likely head coach. The second most likely head coach to get fired is Antonio Pierce. Now, a lot of people are not expecting a first-year head coach to get fired, especially during the season. I think this will take place after. I think that Antonio Pierce was a locker room hire. He's a guy that a lot of people liked. He's a big rah-rah guy, and I mean that as a compliment. I'm not saying that as some kind of discredit to him. I think he is a really good motivator, somebody that could be the emotional leader of a team. But in terms of what the Raiders have done so far this season, 3-12, tons of quarterback questions, the offense having tons of drama, trading Devontae Adams, the defense not performing that great. The only victories are games like the Jacksonville Jaguars. You don't really have any statement franchise building wins during your season. I think Antonio Pierce is going to be moved on from because there are going to be a lot of other great head coaches out on the market this year, like Ben Johnson, with a chance to draft a new franchise quarterback. We have seen the trend moving further and further towards drafting a young quarterback with an offensive head coach, like Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, like Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. You want to pair these guys together to revitalize the offense and make it something productive. That is what I predict the Raiders are going to do. That's why I've got Antonio Pierce as my second most likely head coach to get fired. Number one, the guy I just mentioned, Doug Peterson, Jacksonville Jaguars. I do not think Doug Peterson survives the offseason. What the Jacksonville Jaguars have done over the past 2 years is downright unfettered failure. And I'm not trying to, once again, pile on a coaching staff and say, I would know how to coach better than you do. I am simply talking about the results on the field. The Jags have looked absolutely atrocious. Trevor Lawrence has seen major regression. Now, I know he's been injured, but he has regressed in I don't even know how to describe it. He does not look like the quarterback from 2 seasons ago, pushing into the playoffs, expecting some kind of continued growth. Obviously, we have not seen that. We have seen a Trevor Lawrence that now is hesitant to throw footballs, that is now hesitant to make the play. And it's because he has turned the ball over way more than people were expecting him to. And on top of that, he is getting absolutely destroyed in the pocket. The Jacksonville Jaguars have not protected him, and he hasn't protected himself. And I put that on the coaching staff, in my opinion. That hit on Trevor Lawrence by Shazier from the Texans a few weeks ago that has knocked him out now. That is one of the things that you have got to coach as an offensive-minded coach. Get out of bounds. Do not sacrifice your body. I understand it was a slide, but we have learned now over the past 5 or 6 seasons, the slide does not protect you. Ask Joe Flacco, who got absolutely crushed on a slide. These quarterbacks that are not mobile should never be scrambling, especially when you sign them to a massive contract. I think the Jags are going to move on, find another offensive-minded head coach, and get Trevor Lawrence to the point where he is a playoff franchise quarterback. That we have not seen that yet in Jacksonville. We saw a miracle push at the end of the season to get the Jags into a wild card spot, and then we saw probably the biggest blown lead in NFL history going forward to the next 50 years. The Chargers absolutely blew that game. Trevor Lawrence looked abysmal in that first half, and it was pure desperation that got the Jags to win that AFC wildcard game. And then they show up against the Chiefs. They're a little competitive, but it's not close. I think the Jags have got a lot of room to grow, and I just don't know if they're going to be satisfied with the season that they've had under Doug Peterson. I mean, we're talking about a Jags team that is going to end up probably being 4-13, maybe 3-14. That's just not going to cut it, especially when you're paying Trevor Lawrence and this entire offensive group tons and tons and tons of money. Think about this. The Jags were described in the offseason as the most talented roster in Jacksonville Jaguars history, and it's going to be a 4-13 or 3-14 team. I don't think that the Jags will end up with a same coaching. I don't think the Jags will end up with the same coaching staff next year. But be sure to let me know who you think is going to be fired in the offseason and what you think about this list. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.